Hello and welcome back to the Ghoul Guide Association, the show where we talk about all things Gothic and pop culture. We are, as ever, your Ghoul Guides. My name is Lauren.
And I'm Mary.
And today we are doing a deep dive travelogue, which is something that we've not done for a while because we were on hiatus. We actually did go quite a lot of places while we were on hiatus. But if you've been with us for a while, you might remember that Mary did one when she went to York. She also did one that we definitely did record. We don't know where it went.
It honestly, I did a really great one.
It was really funny.
Yeah, when I went to Prague, and I don't know what happened to it. It's just been eaten by some kind of ghoul. So yeah,
neither of us can find it. We can't find the video file. We can't find the audio file. I can tell you that we made some really funny Nicholas Flamel jokes. We talked about golems. It was a good episode that I'm starting to think we had a shared delusional fever dream.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Lost Prague episode. But this episode is taking us to the heart of Gothic country.
Yes. Yeah. So
the OG.
For our regular listeners, you will know that earlier this year, I mean, it was week 3, week 4, so literally like a few weeks ago. But like at the start of this year, I went on what I was calling my ship moon.
Her maiden voyage.
Yes. My partner and I got civil partnered last year on Halloween.
We shipped them.
Yes. And so we thought, where else to go on our ship moon than the gorgeous ancient Gothic city of Rome.
Roma.
It is, the alleged pinnacle of civilization. And also quite important to the Goths and the Gothic, as well as being a really good place if you are celiac. So
yes.
This is just a shout out to anyone who is celiac and wants to go away on holiday where you can go into an establishment and eat safely and not have to worry. Rome is your place. There's so many restaurants, so many bakeries, so many gelato places that you can go to. So it ticks spooky, delicious, celiac friendly.
Yes.
We went to lots of different places in Rome, including the Museum of Purgatory, which is fabulous. But I'm not going to be talking about that today. What I'm going to be devoting this entire episode to is the Capuchin Crypt, and you will see why if you look at our Instagram, because I'm going to ask Lauren to put up some pictures if she hasn't already, and just they're amazing. I don't know how to kind of describe it. It's a crypt just filled with bones, and I feel like
imagine the most bones and then like times it by 10.
But not just like so when I was in Vienna, I went into the cathedral and into their crypt, and they have this kind of collection of skulls and bones and things, and you walk through it and you see these like piles and piles and piles of bones and skulls, and you're like, oh wow, this is incredible. That's not what this is. The Capuchin Crypt in Rome is filled with, I think, over 4,000 individual pieces of bone, but it's shaped into 6 rooms, and each room is decorated in a specific way. So I'm getting ahead of myself there, but that is a little taster of what this episode will be about. So if Gothic tourism is your thing, and if you want to learn more about the Capuchin Crypt, then buckle up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you listened to our review of the Bone Temple and you were
Oh
like,
my
I
gosh.
also wish that I could experience a Temple of Bones.
It's, I mean,
Rome's got you, boo.
honestly, I came back from this holiday and everyone, even what I would call like normie people, have been saying, "Oh, like what was your favorite bit?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Okay, so this sounds really macabre, but it's this crypt full of bones."
Yeah.
But trust me, it's amazing. But I think to start off, uh, you might be thinking, okay, I kind of vaguely know what a crypt is, but what do you mean by Capuchin Crypt? So, to put you on the spot a little bit, Lauren, and it's okay if your answer is unknown, but do you know what a Capuchin monk is or what we mean by Capuchin?
I didn't even know that that was how you pronounced it. I thought it was Capuchin.
Okay, maybe I've got that wrong.
So, no, I'm fairly sure that if I was gonna bet on which one of us was right, I would bet you.
I have been
Um,
horribly wrong with pronunciation in the past, so I wouldn't bet on
no,
me, but
I mean, as you probably remember from when we were doing the PhD, I am not great with sects and denominations at all. Famously really got confused about what a Jesuit was. There was the time I got really, really confused about what Anglicans were. Um, so no, I can't say. I know the name. Like as soon
mm,
as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, that's a monk order. Like that's a brotherhood. But couldn't tell you what their specific thing is because like I know that like some of them it's like education, some of it's other things. The only ones I really know much about is like the Franciscans,
mhm.
because they were like the ones that were really involved in the conquistadors like era. But yeah, I don't know shit about the Capuchins.
Okay, so that's really interesting because you'll never guess. Basically, the Capuchin monks are an order of Catholic Franciscan monks. So it is,
Oh.
they are born out of this
Okay.
older order, and they're sometimes known as the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin. And
Okay.
this specific order was created in the 16th century to bring the daily life of monks back to the way of life, of solitude and penance that was
Oh.
originally envisaged and modelled by the order's founder, Saint Francis of Assisi. So it
That's
is,
really interesting. I didn't
yeah,
realize that. I was gonna say this is showing your hand sometimes as a historian. I was about to say I didn't realize they were so new because
yeah,
like,
yeah.
the 16th century is relatively modern as far as like monastic orders go, but that makes sense that they were kind of like they're essentially like a Franciscan revival movement then.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to it in a minute, but I think you saying that they're relatively new is interesting because I think a lot of Gothic novels feature Capuchin monks, as I think will become clear. And
That makes sense.
I think when you think like Gothic novels written in the 18th and 19th century, looking back
Mhm.
to a couple of hundred years before, and the 16th, 17th, 18th century, it is just old enough for them to be kind of old and spooky and Catholic, but
Mhm.
also still not like,
Still relatively.
yeah, um
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting because I think if you'd have said like what comes to mind, I kind of had a vague idea that maybe they were one of the more like frugal, minimalist. Um, but I was going to say I think the reason I think that is because of the Gothic. But then if that's actually where I've probably got that back of the
yeah,
mind association from, then
yeah,
that would make sense. Okay, cool.
100%, yeah. So we're not going to go into St. Francis here. Maybe we'll pick him up when we do a Gothic Lives of Saints talk. But the
Yeah.
TLDR of St. Francis, he was an Italian mystic, a poet, and a Catholic friar who was inspired to live a Christian life of poverty. And I think for Francis of Assisi and then the orders that he inspired and founded, that idea living frugally, as you've said, of not having more than you need, is very central and foundational. So the Capuchins, they essentially in the 16th century looked around at everyone and was like, we need to go back to that mission of poverty.
So they were like, Macca.
Yeah.
Make Catholicism great again. Macca.
Something like that. They wanted a more pure way of living and of living in a brotherhood. And so initially,
you say 16th century?
16th century, yeah.
Okay. So is that pre-Luther?
Possibly, potentially, yes.
But
maybe.
we're kind of talking like, if especially Italy, we're kind of talking dawn of the Renaissance, and therefore a period of like art and indulgence and
absolutely
some questioning of Catholic authority.
Yes, exactly. Which is probably why initially the order was forced out of the church. They were like, oh no, you're, too extreme. We're happy with how things are. Don't rock the boat. They were given refuge by another bunch of monks called the Camaldolese monks. And apologies if I am pronouncing that wrong. My pronunciation is awful. But this was like a kind of reclusive order of monks who took them in and were like, don't worry, you can do what you want here. And in gratitude to this refuge, the Capuchin monks adopted the attire of the Camaldolese monks, which included wearing a beard and what's known as a cappuccio hood, which was at the time in Italy the kind of attire of a hermit. So the cappuccio hood is like a kind of pointy, long.
I was going to say that's the pointy, long one, right?
Yeah, it covers your face. It's very simple and basic, but also so again, if we think to Gothic novels, that hood is very iconic and important in having these Gothic monks. And just imagine an individual from this order standing in the shadows, and you're not entirely
fucking creepy.
It's creepy. But it's meant to be about poverty and living life frugally. So it's from that hood actually that the Capuchin monks became known as the Capuchin monks, because of the hood. And then as the order started to become established, so eventually they were able to not need to be kept in refuge, and they went out and then established their own orders. They started to establish certain rules that were about ensuring that the life of a Capuchin monk was one of extreme austerity, extreme simplicity, and extreme poverty. So the monasteries themselves, each kind of order within the kind of Capuchin monks would have like a monastery. They could not maintain any possessions. So if you think about some churches having lots of paintings, artwork, gold, jewels, maybe some important manuscripts, not in the Capuchin order. There was no possessions. Supplies in the monastery also shouldn't exceed what was necessary for a few days. So essentially the food stored in monasteries should only last a few days. It shouldn't be we have food for like months, because the idea was that you should, the main idea was that you should obtain everything by begging, go around and ask for donations essentially, because they also weren't allowed to touch money. So it was like, you can't have any possessions, you can't have any money, and you rely on people giving you food to allow you, I guess, to, again, it's austerity and poverty in the extreme, which I think is also why this order inspired a lot of Gothic depictions.
Yeah, it's kind of borderline self-flagellation, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
you know, the idea that begging forces a level of humility, and especially at this time, like one of the episodes we never recorded was when I went to Milan. And I went to the Duomo and the art museum there. And what was really interesting, and I remember saying to you, was like so much of this art was from the private collections of major Italian bishops, like donating it to the Duomo, or it was like whoever was the bishop of like Milan at the time, like royal families and ducal families and things like that, donating art and artifacts, like religious art and artifacts, because the museum is all religious art and artifacts up until a certain point, like to him. So this kind of complete 180 into no possessions, no nothing, especially in like the 16th century, to not have a food store. Like I usually think of monks as being like brewers and farmers and bakers and things like that. Like, you know, remember in Mexico when we got really addicted to those Mexican candies that the nuns make in Puebla?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like I always think of those like monastic orders as food and the production of food being not only a way they sustain themselves, but also like that they funded the order. So that's quite an intense lifestyle for the 1500s.
Very, very intense. And also, along with this kind of, you know, these rules that applied to money and belongings and how you would obtain and spend your day, they also had a certain kind of habit. So the habit was meant to be simple, but it had the very large, distinctive pointed hood. Sometimes they wouldn't wear any shoes, so they would be going around barefoot. And their
Oh.
habit was to be tied with a woolen cord that was tied in with 3 knots. And the 3 knots were meant to record the order's importance of obedience, chastity, and poverty. So these are the kind of like 3 foundational points of the order. You have to obey, you have to be chaste, and you have to live in extreme poverty. And this specific version of the Capuchin attire was also modelled after our OG monk, Saint Francis himself, who stylized a cross-shaped tunic. So another monk writing in the 13th century, the Franciscan monk Thomas of Celano, he wrote 3 hagiographies of Saint Francis. And hagiographies are essentially biographies, but they're quite biased. You know, this is a saint and he's amazing, or they're amazing, and this is all the amazing stuff that they did, and here's a list of how they lived their lives.
Yeah,
We've
as you mentioned in the
talked about
Saint
this.
Nick episode, they're
Yeah.
quite heavily embellished.
Yes. But he, in his first hagiography, Thomas of Celano writes, so this is in the life of Blessed Francis, which is also called the First Life, so it details his kind of early life, that this is the way that St. Francis dressed. So he says, St. Francis makes himself a tunic in the shape of a cross to keep away all of the temptations of the devil. He makes it very rough, so to crucify the flesh with all its vices and sins. It was poor and coarse, so that the world would not envy it. So I think that it is interesting and significant that the Capuchin monks were like, yes, we're going to go back to and revive the importance of Saint Francis's cloak and tunic. So it is essentially a cross where you have like the long arms, the down, and that kind of thing. It's the material. It's meant to be cheap and coarse so that it's not comfortable. I mean, we've all been there wearing like a really itchy sweater, but imagine if that's all you're wearing all day, every day. It like awful.
It's a neurodiverse nightmare.
I think it's also
Although,
just a
you know,
nightmare for everyone, No one wants to be wearing an itchy sweater.
Well, I guess I was right then. Like, it is a form of self-flagellation, isn't it? Like, it's not quite the extremes of a Dan Brown novel, but it's that kind of like forcing yourself to live in discomfort to be closer to God.
Yes. And I think that is very important, that kind of daily reminder of suffering, and also then not wanting anyone else to envy what you're wearing. So the devil's not going to want to tempt you, but also other people aren't going to want to
the devil's like,
steal your stuff.
Look at your raggedy ass.
And other things that they would do is, so they lived a life of extreme poverty, but they also wanted to help those in need. So other things that they would do and what they would devote in like their orders to would be things like healing the sick or feeding the hungry, helping to clothe, you know, the poor, and all of these kinds of things. So it isn't just about looking inward at the order. The routine and the regulations are to strip away, I guess, some human vices and human temptations so that they could focus on living out, you know, their interpretation of the Gospels, the message of the Christian Messiah, and also St. Francis of Assisi. So it's like, yes, we're going to go and do good, and we're also going to live quite a miserable life.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the most fresh piping hot of takes, because this has been known, but it really does just remind you that, like, there's a real culty aspect to this, that eradication of identity. I mean, we just talked about this in the 28 Years Later review, but that idea that there's no individualism, like, that if you're gonna devote yourself in this way, like, you should be not only easily identifiable as part of the order, but like you have no, it's like this suggestion that individualism is a vice, essentially, rather than a virtue.
Absolutely. I guess partly because pride is a sin and ego is bad. So if everyone is de-individualized, they look the same, they work the same, maybe they have different things that they do, you know, like John might go out and help with medicine and people who are ill, while I was going to say Gary is not the name of an Italian monk.
Brother Gary.
Yeah,
Padre
Matteo.
Gary.
Might go out and help to feed the poor, but you get the idea. Yeah. Like, you can have different things that you do, but it is all about not like having the flashiest clothes or being the best. But I think it's interesting that you do mention cults, because another important thing about the Capuchin monks is that by the end of the 16th century, so they are established as an order at this point, and you know, they're going out, they're recognizable as an identifiable order of monks, but they also became very obsessed or interested in what's called as the iconographic theme of the bleeding Christ. So this is the image of Christ on the cross as he is crucified. So there's lots of images that would be in these kinds of monasteries or associated churches, specific, not just of the crucifixion, but showing the bleeding, emphasizing the suffering. So I think that kind of identification with and wanting to in some way emote some of that, or you know, convey some of that, or experience some of that suffering as a
I bet they were all just absolutely, they were just desperate to get stigmatized. Gagging for a stigmata.
Well, yeah. So when I went around, so there is a museum that's attached to the crypt, and there's lots of portraits of monks, various monks from this order, and so many of them have skulls in, which I was like, yes, this is great. I love this. Because I think that it is important to remember our humanity. And I know people disagree with me, but I always think of that as a really beautiful thing. But there was also in a little display case a bit of cloth that had been bled on, apparently by a saint, and it was kind of a, you know, this is the blood of this person, and it was revered as a you know, what's reliquary. The word that a reliquary, yes. So yeah, like stigmata, suffering, blood, all of that kind of thing. I think even just in the kind of imagery of that, it was all about what these Capuchin monks were interested in and wanted to kind of bring into their order in some way. So again, cool. Yeah.
Love that for them.
Love that for them. Okay, so that is essentially who the Capuchin monks are, because they're still an existing order, and so they're how basically
they established Franciscan extremists.
Yes, 100%. Which brings me to the crypt. So this crypt is located just underneath the Church of Santa Maria della Concezione in Rome, which was initially commissioned by Pope Urban VIII in 1626. And after the church had been built, his brother, or one of the Pope's brothers, I always get really confused, there's too many popes, Cardinal Antonio Barberini, who was associated with the Capuchin order, he was part of the order. So he was part of the order and also brother with the Pope.
Okay, so like that's you don't get much more well connected than that, being the fucking Pope's brother.
And I think being in Rome, I think there was a lot of, you know, people who were at various points in their lives were connected to some degree to different popes. I think especially if you were in the Catholic Church in that in a religious, you know, in a religious order, then you would have some, whether it be beef or whether it be a familial relationship or a relationship by marriage or a friendship or some kind of connection with the Pope. But he ordered in 1631 that the remains of thousands of Capuchin friars to be exhumed and transferred from the friary of the Via dei Lucchesi, apologies for that, to this crypt. So essentially, thousands of Capuchin friars, their bodies are exhumed and the remains are taken to this crypt in the Church of Santa Maria in Rome. This was believed to so the crypt itself as it stands today, so all of the bones are moved in the 1630s. The crypt was believed to have been created between 1732 and 1775. So the crypt was established a bit earlier, and there are, I think people believe, the bones of about 3,700 Capuchin monks. And then
that's
also
a lot of people.
I mean, yes, it is a lot of people. And according to tradition, the soil in the cemetery was brought from the Holy Land. So it's also the kind of soil of the ground in the crypt was transferred from Jerusalem, essentially. So it's like you've got all these bones that are taken from another church and then the soil that is brought in from somewhere else.
Oh my god, this is why everybody was scamming. Like I would yeah, bro. This is top grade Palestinian soil.
Yes.
Like, I definitely did not just dig it up from like 5 miles down the road. Like, well, it's 100% Holy Land.
I read this and I was also like, I see now why there would be this idea in in Dracula legends and vampire legends that the soil is really important, because if you need to transport soil, if there had to have been a tradition that was important to bury people in.
The whole
you're buried in the soil of your, you know.
I only know this because of D&D. Like the consecrate, like you have a spell. If you're a cleric, you can like consecrate and deconsecrate. But there is a whole thing about I've learned this playing Curse of Strahd, but there is a whole thing in that about like, you know, if you remove saints' bones from the ground, or if you take part of like spell components, so sometimes like it has to be the soil of your homeland and things like that. So there's definitely like a whole thing about not only consecrated ground, but then, you know, the soil of Jerusalem would be the most consecrated. So
absolutely,
that's not just some, it's not just some pope being like, I bless the soil.
They're not doing this for a random reason, I think, is what we can establish. This was a well-established, long-standing tradition in many different cultures, where whether it's because it's consecrated, because it's the holiest of holy, or it's because it's your homeland, certain, like transporting certain soils to bury individuals or groups of people in was seen as a thing that you would do.
I might start carrying a little jar of soil from Nottingham around with me, not for any particular reason, but just because it might be a nice conversation starter. Like, you know, maybe I'm on a first date and they're like, what's that? And I'm like, it's the soil of my forefathers.
I think it's not weird at all. I think it's great.
Age-old tradition. My nephew loves digging, so he would be really into this.
He would help you dig up that soil.
That boy loves to dig. I might do this. I might be like, it's actually an ancient tradition. It's really sacred to me.
Hey, traditions need to get started somewhere.
This is the soil where we buried my cat, who was a very holy being.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I could get on board with that.
Big fat cat, right?
Yeah.
Teese was definitely a holy creature. Sorry, I've derailed us, but soil.
Yeah. Okay, so to get back to the crypt, so when you go in, and I will get to a description of the crypt in a bit, but when you get in to the crypt, there is a plaque in the first chapel. So there are essentially 6 rooms, and each room functions as its own specific chapel. But there is a kind of plaque on the ground that has been translated into lots of different languages, and it reads in English, "What you are now, we used to be. What we are now, you will be." Which sounds so friggin' ominous. But also, again, me personally, I read that and I'm like, yes, that is actually really beautiful.
Boy. That's carpe diem as fuck.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like the idea that we all have stardust. We're all made of stardust, and we have like stardust in our eyes from like different places. I think that that's really beautiful. And
the atoms that make us were once the atoms of something else.
Exactly. And I love that sense of we can relate to the dead, and I think it is a way of remembering and also knowing that we too will be remembered. I think that it's really beautiful, and I know that a lot of people think that's really macabre and creepy, and also this is quite ominous, but you know, it is. I think this crypt really straddles the line, I think, of beautiful and macabre really, really well. So, you know, what more can
that's
I say?
Memento Mori at its heart as well, you know. As someone who experiences immense existential dread, I think people are often like, why do you like this? And I'm like, well, I've got to try and find the beauty and try and find, like, you know, the meaning. And Memento Mori is... It is macabre, but the whole point of Memento Mori was, you know, enjoy your moment. And whilst, yes, 15th century fuckboys had carpe diem and turned it into, you know, Renaissance YOLO, the actual heart of the Memento Mori movement was about value and about enjoying the beauty of life and about valuing the life that you've been given. And I think that's why we still find it so kind of enigmatic and, you know, again, a conversation for another episode, but I really feel like the boom in not only witchcraft but in Gothic aesthetics over the last few years is because so many of us are feeling that dread, be it climate dread, be it political dread, be it nuclear apocalypse dread, be it all of the above. And I think the reason that we are being more and more drawn towards Gothic aesthetics isn't because things are shit and horrible and we're all scared, but because there's beauty to be found in it. Like, I basically just regurgitated like a Cure album there, essentially. But I think that's why a lot of the stuff from the 80s is coming back into fashion, because there was that same sort of feeling of anxiety. And I think you see it again and again and again, like at crucial moments.
I think, not to derail this too much, because we did talk a lot about these films, but I think talking about that Gothic aesthetic in our current moment, as soon as I saw, I remember last year, as soon as I saw the poster for 28 Years Later with a kind of tower of skulls, I was so excited. And I remember we talked about this in our review with Kathleen, so if you haven't listened to that and you're interested, you can go and find it. I'll include a link in the description below. We talk about that film, and there is a bit in the film where essentially Ray Fiennes' character, Dr. Kelson, gives a long kind of speech about Memento Mori. He is a doctor who has built this ossuary, and anyone that he finds, so it is a zombie film, spoiler, sorry, but he treats the bones of humans and infected, the zombie, to essentially strip away the skin and flesh so that you're left with bones, and then he shapes them into these amazing towers, and they're meant to be a way to remember the dead. And he says in that film, so in 28 Years Later, which came out in 2025, Memento Mori, but also Memento Amor, which is, you know, remember that you are dead, remember that you will die, but also remember to love. And I think that for me, when I watched that film, yes, it was very much about the remembrance of death and remembering the dead, and that kind of memorialization is also about remembering that life is also so important and to be celebrated. And again, we talked about this a little bit in our latest episode where we review the latest 28 Years Later film, which has the subtitle The Bone Temple, which I think actually pairs really well with
We've been making
this Capuchin
a lot
Crypt.
of bone jokes.
Yes, but it's this idea of here again is something that, yes, it does look macabre and ominous, but it's there's also something beautiful there.
Yeah, to kind of do an explicit link to the Gothic, both this is Memento Mori, and not so much maybe this because they're all Capuchins, but like what I was thinking about when you, and I don't know if I say this or not in the episode, but I remember thinking when you were telling me about the first 28 Years Later film that it's essentially taking us back to graveyard poetry and the elegy on a country churchyard, and all of those poems that really focus on the idea that in death we are all equal, and that is both a reminder to be humble, which is what these guys are doing, but it's also a reminder to love and be loved, and to, you know, to to dance like no one's watching, essentially. Like there's a lot of that stuff in the kind of early Gothic that's very much like, don't live your life, you know. We've been talking a lot in pop culture discourse at the minute about like the Gen Z fear of being cringe, And that's kind of what the graveyard poets were saying, was like, don't live in fear of being cringe, don't live in fear of these things, because we'll all be exactly the same when we die. And it's that same thing of like, well, the zombie, the human, like, it doesn't matter who you were in life because this is going to happen to us, so value and enjoy life. And I suppose that's that sort of beauty of Memento Mori, is it's not, some artists and some preachers use it as a stick, and I don't think that's what the ethos of Memento Mori is. And I think that most of the art is kind of in line with that. It's very much about, you know, be free and live well and live, you know, in the way that you want to live, but also treat others well and treat others the way you want to be treated, because getting one over on somebody else, fucking someone over, all of these things aren't going to mean anything, because you'll all end up the same way dead.
Absolutely. I think that it is a really important lesson, or just thing for us to remember, which is why I think I find it so moving, I guess, is in that way.
Should we have put a trigger warning at the top of this?
I will put a trigger warning in the description, but I think
trigger warning. We talk about
the episode title will have crypt in it, so hopefully people will have got that. But I will have a trigger warning.
Get a little bit we did go a little bit unexpectedly philosophical there.
Yes. Well, before we move on, I will just quickly quote one of my favourite characters, Buffy Summers. Seize the day, because tomorrow you might be dead. Yeah. So with that, moving back to this crypt of bones, there's actually a lot of speculation about who is the artist or artists behind the rooms. And one legend, which I think you'll find quite interesting, posits that it was the creative work of a group of Capuchin monks who took refuge in Rome during the Terror in France, which, you know, as we know, took place in 1793, apologies, to 1794. So essentially, in the early kind of like 18th century, the bones were moved to this crypt, and then at some point, somebody or someone arranged the bones in the way that you can see them today. So this legend suggests that there was this group of monks who had experienced the terror in France, which, Lauren, this is your jam. Do you want to give a kind of one-liner TLDR of what we mean when we say the terror in France?
So after the execution of the French monarchy, the Directory, the governing body of France, essentially went on a purge, started guillotining people left, right, and centre, even each other, figures like Robespierre. And what they had also done was they didn't outlaw religion. They did try to bring in a new religion, which I actually do have down for a future episode. But what they did do was, because a lot of the monastic orders had a lot of political power, they exiled or put a lot of restrictions on a lot of the religious leaders who they deemed to be corrupt or part of the royalist movement, and a lot of people were guillotined, whether or not they were corrupt, criminal, you know, guilty, innocent, and that's why it's called the Terror. So lots of people fled, and a lot of the religious orders fled to particularly Italy and Spain.
Yeah, which I think makes sense, especially if you are Catholic. You would flee to the kind of the center of the Catholic universe, and also Italy and France aren't that far away from each other.
Yeah,
so
it's
there
worth
would
saying
be that
as
link.
well that a lot of noble families had like a personal confessor. Or like they sponsored a chapel. So most noble families and aristocratic families had like a friar or an order that they were associated with.
Yeah.
So, and this is quite popular in the literature, a lot of particularly the monks actually like went into exile with their noble families, like as their confessor and things like that. So yeah, you did have a mass exodus of Catholic what was the word I'm looking for? Clergy? Is that the
Clergy,
right word?
Orders,
From
religious people,
from early revolutionary France.
So I think it's an interesting theory, and it does make sense that if you had been in France during this time of this kind of boiling over persecution, seeing lots of people being thrown in prison or being murdered in the street quite violently, the guillotine is it's a very public spectacle of death, then I think it would make sense that you might, come to this crypt and be like, I'm going to do something with these bones.
Yeah,
but it's
particularly if you think that so obviously there was a divine right of kings. I don't know how, I've not studied the religious side of the French Revolution, but a lot of the issue was that a lot of the religious leaders saw the dynasty as the Bourbon dynasty as the holy monarchy. God had appointed these kings. The king had a divine right to rule. So I think as well, if you believe in the divine right of kings and you're a religious man, and then you've just seen the king and queen of France publicly executed, publicly humiliated, you've seen the Dauphin like locked away, all of these things, you potentially that would be not only horrific, but maybe like quite a crisis of faith.
100%. Yeah, it would definitely stick in your mind.
Yeah.
It's not confirmed that this is the individuals who are responsible for the crypts, though. So this is essentially
quite late.
It is quite late. Yeah, there is another story that suggests that it's the work of just one monk who spent his time in the crypt just as a period of atonement. So he wanted to escape. Yeah, he wanted to not be punished, but he still wanted to atone. So he was just in the crypt on his own for years, and then as part of his personal atonement, he made these rooms. Both of those theories could be wrong. We just don't know. Obviously there's a lot of effort and thought that has gone into arranging the bones in a specific way, but at the same time it's that there doesn't seem to be a known record of exactly who, whether it was an individual or a group, who created it and why. Although I guess you can kind of infer the why. It's a display of memento mori with a specifically religious tinge to it. So how then did people receive this once it was built? The decoration in the crypt has been described as, quote, the work of a grotesque and hermit genius. Quote,
that's what they call me.
Yep. Quote, monk patience, which I think is interesting. Or, quote, a man of ardent faith, joking with death and joyfully thinking of resurrection. So I think here, what I do want to say about the crypt is that you go through these rooms and these chapels, and then at the end, the final room is about resurrection. So they're all kind of themed.
Oh, okay.
And some of them are themed around specific bones, but the end one is very much about resurrection. So it's almost like walking through the crypts, you're going on this journey, and at the end of it, there is, it's all the way through, but at the end, there is this undergirding of the religious message of Christianity, and that is the resurrection. So it is kind of, I think that I really like that last one where it's kind of like this joyful thinking of this. And also the idea that if we think about the plaque when you walk in, what you are now, we used to be, what we are now, you will be. And then the Christian theological idea of resurrection in the end times. Well, are these bones gonna get up and start walking? If I'm a bone and
I was
I'm a
just thinking
skeleton, there is I don't know, like it's interesting to think about
because that was
the
like
practicalities.
the whole that was like the whole ethical, I'm going to say conundrum. I think that's the best word. The ethical conundrum at the turn of the 18th into 19th century was about how literally do we understand the concept of resurrection, because that was the whole panic around dissection. And it was this idea of, well, if you are not whole, do you come back? Like, how do you come back, basically? Do you come back a zombie? Like, or does it matter? And obviously that's why there was a lot of issues around things like cremation. I have certain thoughts about that because you just had, massive deaths across Europe. Some people have been lost in the battlefield, bodies haven't come home, people haven't been buried. There was a lot of like debate over how to interpret the idea of resurrection. So I was really surprised that you said that, because I was like, but I assume all of these, they weren't like, well, we need to keep Brother Peter's bones together so that when he, like, are you going round resurrected, like putting your bones back together? Like, excuse me, I think that's my femur.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. I do always think about that, the practicality of that, where it's like, and this is why some religions don't believe in cremation, and they also don't believe in certain death practices that would alter the body, in
certain types of like embalming and things like
embalming is the word that I could not think of, so yeah, thank you.
You are welcome.
Yeah. And it just depends on different orders, different sects, different branches of Christianity or different religions as to what is important in the theological afterlife that is promoted by that particular group. So I did say I was going to talk about the actual rooms themselves, and I actually have two quite long quotes because I read these and I was like, I cannot do it better than these quotes. So what I'm going to do, Lauren, is I'm going to read them to you. And if you are watching this on YouTube, I'm going to overlay this with some of my pictures from the crypts so that you also have a visual. If you are listening, please go and have a look on our Instagram. So you can look along as we describe this. And Lauren, you do have some of my photos. I don't know if you want to look at them while I'm reading you this description. But the first quote, which is the shorter of the two, is by a 19th century historian called Ferdinand Gregorius. And he wrote this in 1853. So, it is strange to see how artistic form and aesthetic law have almost triumphed over what is inherently horrifying. The fact is, however, that art has arrived here at the point of transforming into richly shaped figures and graceful arabesques what the vanquished see as the peak of horror, and what the earth usually enfolds mercifully in the mantle of death. So I think, yeah, it's a I think I read that and I was like, this is really interesting and beautiful in that mixing of death and horror, but also with art. So you'll see from these images that the bones are shaped into certain shapes. There are some chandeliers that are made out of bones.
It's basically ivory, isn't it?
Yeah. There are candle holders. There's decorations on the ceilings. Each room has kind of like the back wall and then the two side walls. And there are also full skeletons who are robed in the Capuchin habit. So if you were listening, to our early discussion of the Capuchin habit and you want to see what it looks like, then they are in some of the pictures, and some of them are lying down, some of them are standing up, some of them are holding certain things. It just depends on the room. And I think that it adds to the experience as you go through, that you have all these individual bones, and some rooms are devoted to like the femur room, which the primary thing, or there's a room of skulls, and the primary thing that you see is that specific bone item, but then there are also, holding them up, other bones as well. And it is kind of like the individual and the whole, and how you can make what I see as beautiful art out of these kinds of effects of death. Yes, there is a little bit of the grotesque to it and the horror and the macabre, but I still think that it is definitely not just a pile of bones. It is art.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think
so.
With that, I was just looking at the pictures again.
Yeah, no, I have so many, and I will send you more. But they are really addictive. I spent so much time here when we were there. I think, like, I spent so much time that there were like 3 or 4 different groups of people, maybe more, who kind of went through and then overtook us and then left. Because I was just spending so much time looking at them.
I was very similar in both Cadiz and Milan.
Yeah.
And Milan was worse because I was there with my sister and brother-in-law and my 6-month-old at the time nephew, and obviously they couldn't get down into the crypt. And I kept like sticking my head through the bars so that I could like see more closely, because obviously it was very delicate. And that wasn't even anywhere near as impressive as this. So yeah, I don't blame you for being down there that long.
Awestruck.
And as we all know, Mary loves churches.
Well, yeah, exactly. So my final quote that I'm going to read is from the Marquis de Sade, who visited,
that guy.
Yeah, he visited the crypt in 1775, which I think maybe kind of discredits the whole French terror legend. Yeah, no, I know. That's what I mean. Like, I included it because I know how much you love that period of history, and I think that it is interesting to think about that. But also, we don't know who made these. But the Marquis de Sade did visit.
Wrong revolution.
So again,
case, 75.
Yeah, I'm gonna put some pictures on the video. If you are listening to the audio, this is again your reminder to go and just have a look at our Instagram and flick through the pictures as we listen to the Marquis de Sade's description of the Capuchin Crypt of Rome. So he describes it as: a German priest of this house created a monument of funerary art, worthy of an Englishman mind, niches, vaults, ceiling, ornaments of pleasant, regular design, lamps, crosses, and all made out of bones and skulls, in 6 or 7 adjoining rooms. In every niche and under every arch there are well-preserved skeletons placed in various poses, some recumbent, some preaching, and some in prayer. All these skeletons are dressed in the Capuchin habit. I have never seen anything more impressive. This monument should not be seen by day, but in the glow of funeral lamps. Windows are left open so as to purify the air of this cavern and to let the light of the sun diminish the horror. The various graves of these good friars are distributed in each of these small chambers like stones in a garden, and the sight of death surrounding them on all sides does not prevent them from being as cheerful as in the rest of Europe. So, yeah, I think there's some advice from the Marquis de Sade about...
It's rare that I would be like, oh, what beautiful words from the Marquis de Sade.
Yeah. You want a window open. Yeah, you want a window open, but also maybe go where you can look at this stuff by candlelight.
Yeah. It's interesting that he kind of has that thing about like a German priest, an English mind. Like, that's quite interesting because I think, 1775, that's like right at the beginning of the era of the Gothic novel, of things like the Old English Baron. It's, you know, the year that the American Revolution starts. It's the year that Jane Austen was born. But the Gothic imagination in Britain, sort of 20 years later, would very much see that as something uniquely Italian.
Yeah.
And see German Gothic as something very, very different. So it's really interesting that, like, 20 years before, he is kind of like seeing all of those different influences. Whereas I think when you've got the sort of Capuchin style monks in the Gothic imagination in the 1790s, that kind of ossuary, that kind of penitent, like, it was almost seen as excessive and overindulgent in the kind of later 18th century Gothic imagination. So it's really interesting that he has that response of 20 years earlier. That's really interesting. But also, yeah, hilarious, because how could it possibly have been built during the Terror if the Marquis de Sade saw it in 1775?
Yeah. One of those Gothic kind of fabrications, I think, that is nice to think about, but also probably isn't true.
Yeah, it's giving Mary Queen of Scots at Hardwick Hall.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that is the Capuchin Crypt of Rome. I would absolutely recommend that if you are in Rome, or if you're looking for somewhere to visit because you like Gothic tourism, this is 100% ideal for you. It's I mean, it's not long. It depends. I guess it depends how long you want to spend in the museum looking at pictures and paintings of monks, and then how long you want to spend in the crypt. But it's a nice afternoon, I think, for me personally. And I was just going to keep this as a one thing for the episode, but I am also just going to very briefly talk about the Brotherhood of Death, who were also in Rome.
Sick.
Yeah. So this is also a Capuchin monk order, but in a different church. This is the Santa Maria del Orazione e Morte, which is the Church of St. Mary of Prayer and Death. It was built by a confraternity that assumed responsibility for interning abandoned corpses in Rome. So when I said that different monks or different orders would be interested in doing things, this specific order, what they wanted to do was to help to bury abandoned corpses. So if people died, if people couldn't afford to it's very sorry.
There's a pretty big act of charity, particularly in like the 16th, 17th sort of centuries, like abandoned corpses. Funeral costs and death costs were quite steep.
Yeah, and if you couldn't afford to bury your loved one or your friend, you would just leave them, or if you didn't, if you were, for whatever reason, didn't have any family or friends and you just died, there might not be anyone to bury you.
And it was also like a really significant health hazard, because obviously 100%. You can't just bury people wherever. Rome famously is near water.
Yes.
It's quite like burying people in the right places was quite a considerable task. And obviously, yes, a lot of knowledge was lost in the Middle Ages, but a big part of the Renaissance was realizing that there was a connection between where you kept the dead and hygiene. So that's actually like a quite important act of charity.
Yes, it's incredibly important.
Not quite as grimdark as the name immediately suggested.
Yeah, St. Mary of Prayer and Death does sound, again, quite ominous and macabre, but there is something positive in the acts that they do. So the church itself was first built in 1575, and then it was rebuilt completely in 1734. I couldn't find out why, but Outside the church, so over the entrance, there are depictions of laureled skulls that are over the entrance facade. And there are also on each side of the door, there's 2 engraved plaques on each side of the facade. So I will say I didn't manage to go into this church, but I did have a look at the outside via the ghost tour that I went on in Rome, which of course,
Amazing.
yeah. And when our tour guide was talking about this church, I was looking around. I'd already spotted the skulls and then these 2 kind of images on the side. So while I was listening to him, I took photographs of all these things, and then he got on talking about them, and I was like, I have already clocked these. And then everyone was
My
like,
ghoul senses.
where are they? Where are they? And I got to point them out to the rest of the people on the tour. But one of these plaques.
Mary, you ghoul guided.
I did.
You
Yeah,
literally
I did.
ghoul guided.
I also then he was like, does anyone have any questions? And I was like, is this church related to the Capuchin Crypt? And then he was like, oh yes, I was just getting to that. So I was like, sorry.
Now you know how I feel.
Yes. So one of the plaques depicts a winged skeleton with the inscription that reads, today for me, tomorrow for you. Again, it's ominous, but also I think beautiful in promoting that equality. The other one, over an arms box, is the seated death, who holds a winged hourglass in his hand, and he's observing a dying man. So I took photographs of both of these. I will send them to Lauren. We will put them on our Instagram. So please do go and check them out. They are beautiful. And then, over the main door, there's another winged hourglass, which is a kind of, you also see something similar in the Capuchin Crypt, and it's essentially a symbol of the incessant passing of time towards death. So like the Capuchin monks of the crypt, it is an example of the cult of death and the importance of the iconography of death and memento mori. I think there is an association with the macabre and grotesque horror, which, yes, there is part of it, but it is also meant to have positive connotations as well.
Well, it's worth just saying here as a reminder, if you haven't listened to our Gothic Ghoul School episodes, that one of the reasons we consider it to be macabre is because during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, there was a rejection of medieval art and architecture as bad taste and as being dark and superstitious and macabre and all these things. So, one of the reasons that we see it that way is because during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, we really rejected it and we moved away from it, and it was seen as being sort of backwards, and it was seen as being grotesque and sort of in poor taste, and we moved towards a much more light, majestic, neoclassical style of art, that even though we have multiple Gothic revivals, we've still never really, it was such a fundamental European movement that we've never really gotten past it. And I think that's why every time we have a Gothic pop culture revival, there's always a little bit of who will think of the children about it, because we see it now as being because that rejection of it in the 17th century meant that the supernatural, the macabre, memento mori, the demonic, all of those things got mashed together, that the illusions we now have in our minds when we see those things are so different to what they were in the Middle Ages and the medieval period and the early parts of the Renaissance, because people were still doing it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that it is important to remember that this specific church still has a working order today, and they are still involved with the
the Brotherhood of Death are still Brotherhood in.
Yes, which is why, and it's understandable, it's it's very difficult to get in. They only open to the public on certain days, and they only let a select number of people in every time. So I didn't manage to go in, which is a shame, because inside, like the Capuchin Crypt, although not to the same extent, there are decorations that are made of bones. So there is in particular a number of skull candelabras that are also, have other bone parts, and a large cross that's made out of skulls inside the church. So I would have loved, I know, I would have loved to have gone inside. I didn't manage to do that. But again, if you're interested in Gothic tourism, I would definitely see if you can go. Either go and have a look at the outside, because the outside is beautiful, or if you can get inside, go and have a look around. Because it is also about that adornment of death, but balancing the macabre with the beautiful. And I just want to finish with a story that was told to me on this ghost tour about this brotherhood and this church, which actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that Rome is on a river and how important that is to burials, because that features in this story. So I can't remember the exact date that this happened, but the Brotherhood were burying these dead bodies in the garden of the church, and so there were lots of corpses and bodies that they had buried in the garden. And then one year the river rose. There was a lot of rain.
So
and it flooded. It broke its banks. It flooded, and the soil became so wet and damaged that essentially the bodies, which maybe hadn't been buried as deep as they should have been, and at varying stages of decomposition, started to just rise up to the surface and start to float around, which is an incredibly horrible image to think about. And they were then, some of them were reburied, some of them, because they didn't know who these people were, contributed to the decorations in the church. But I just think that it is, it's
you'd be surprised really how often that happens.
Yeah, I just thought I'd end on this kind of ghost story about the Brotherhood of Death, because it's such a horrible image.
I mean, my brain instantly was like, oh, dysentery.
Oh no, it was very bad. It was very bad. But
don't bury your bodies near the source of your drinking water.
No, absolutely not. So on that cheerful note, visit Rome, visit the crypt, visit the Brotherhood of Death.
Sensational. Well, thank you for that for that deep dive / travelogue, Mary. I always enjoy hearing about your travels. I visit these places vicariously through you, which is always enjoyable, and hopefully I will get to go soon. I said I did get to go to Milan last year, and that was beautiful, and I will probably not do an episode about Milan, but I discovered while I was there that actually the north of Italy is where the Ostrogothic kingdom was, and the Lombards, and all the rest of it, and it has quite a rich Gothic history of its own. And I did also, on a boat trip, get to see where Mary Shelley stayed. So maybe do a bit of an episode about Mary Shelley's Italy, because I am currently working on a book proposal about Mary Shelley's post-war Gothic. So maybe that will encourage me to actually finish that book proposal. Sorry, Angela, if you're listening. But maybe let us know sort of if there's places that you think that we would like, or that we should research. We're not rich, so we might not be able to visit, but we could do like a bit of more deep diving, or it might help us plan our next set of journeys. So let us know if you've got a location in mind, or somewhere you think we might find interesting. And in the meantime, as ever, Stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky.